The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the winding mountain road as Emily Carter's old Volvo crested the final hill. Below, nestled in a valley embraced by the imposing peaks of the Rockies, lay Estes Park. A quaint collection of shops and houses dotted the landscape, framed by the deep green of pine forests. A sigh escaped Emily's lips. After the whirlwind of packing up her life in Chicago and the long drive, she had finally arrived. Her grandmother's cabin was a short drive from the town center, tucked away on a quiet dirt road that snaked into the woods. The cabin itself was small and weathered, built of dark wood that seemed to absorb the fading light. A porch swing hung motionless, and the windows stared out like vacant eyes. As Emily pulled into the overgrown driveway, a sense of unease settled over her, a feeling of being watched from the shadows of the surrounding trees. She shook it off, attributing it to fatigue. This was a new beginning, a chance to escape the city and the lingering grief of losing her grandmother. She just needed to get inside. The heavy wooden door creaked open as she pushed it, revealing a dimly lit interior that smelled of dust and old wood. The first night in the cabin was unsettling. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling and the rustling of leaves outside. Emily had unpacked a few essentials, made a simple dinner, and tried to read, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being alone, truly alone, for the first time since her grandmother's passing. As darkness deepened, a new sound emerged. Faint whispers carried on the wind. At first, she dismissed them as the wind whistling through the trees, but they persisted, growing slightly louder, more distinct. They seemed to weave in and out of the rustling leaves, a low, murmuring chorus just beyond the threshold of understanding. Then she heard it, a distinct whisper of her name. Emily, barely audible, yet undeniably there. A chill ran down her spine. She rose from the worn armchair and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the forest was a black, impenetrable mass. The whispers continued, now interspersed with other words, fragments of sentences she couldn't quite decipher. They sounded like pleas or perhaps warnings. One phrase, though muffled, seemed to repeat, "Lost in the wind." Unease turned to a prickling fear. She retreated from the window, her heart pounding. She began to explore the cabin, hoping to find a logical explanation for the sounds. In a dusty corner of the living room, she discovered a small wooden chest. Inside, nestled among faded photographs and dried flowers, was a leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn and cracked, but the title, written in elegant script, was still legible. Eleanor's Musings. Eleanor was her grandmother's name. With trembling hands, Emily opened the journal, hoping to find some comfort, some connection to the past, unaware of the secrets it held. The journal's pages were filled with Eleanor's neat, cursive handwriting. The early entries were mundane, detailing daily life in Estes Park, the changing seasons, and her love for the surrounding mountains. But as Emily flipped through the pages, she noticed a shift in tone. The later entries became more introspective, tinged with a growing sense of unease. Eleanor wrote of strange occurrences, of feeling watched, and of hearing whispers on the wind, just as Emily had. One entry, dated several years prior, stood out. "The wind carries voices tonight, whispers that chill me to the bone. They speak of loss, of a great sorrow that hangs over this land. I've heard the old stories, the legends of the massacre, but I never truly believed them until now. It feels as though the very air is saturated with their pain." The massacre. Emily remembered hearing vague stories from her grandmother about a tragic event in the area's history, a conflict between early settlers and Native American tribes. She had never paid much attention to them, dismissing them as local folklore. Now, reading her grandmother's words, a shiver ran down her spine. Another entry, written a few months later, described the whispers in more detail. They call out names, not clearly, but just at the edge of hearing. They seem to know my fears, my deepest insecurities. It's as if they're trying to burrow into my mind, to expose the darkness within. Eleanor also mentioned a specific location, a place she called Whispering Ridge, a high point overlooking the valley where the whispers were said to be the strongest. She wrote of a deep sense of dread associated with the place, a feeling that it was a gateway to something beyond human comprehension. The last entry was brief and chilling. "The wind is calling my name tonight. I fear it will not let me go." Emily closed the journal, her heart pounding. The whispers, the stories, the journal entries, it all painted a disturbing picture. She felt a growing certainty that the whispers she had heard were not simply the wind, but something far more sinister, something connected to the history of this place, to the tragedy her grandmother had written about. The next morning, Emily decided to seek more information. She drove into Estes Park, the town looking much brighter in the daylight, though a lingering sense of unease still clung to the air. She headed straight for the Estes Park Museum, a small building housing local historical artifacts and documents. The librarian, a kind elderly man named John Miller, greeted her with a warm smile. Emily explained her interest in the town's history, specifically mentioning the stories of a massacre. John's smile faded slightly. "Ah, yes," he said, his voice softening. "The tragedy at Whispering Ridge, a dark chapter in our history." He led her to a section of the library dedicated to local history. There, among old photographs and newspaper clippings, were documents detailing the events. The records spoke of a conflict between settlers and the Arapaho tribe in the late 1800s. A misunderstanding, a clash of cultures, had escalated into violence, resulting in the deaths of many Native Americans, including women and children. The event had been largely suppressed for years, a shameful secret buried beneath the town's picturesque facade. John pointed to a faded map, showing the location of Whispering Ridge. It was situated just a few miles from where Emily's grandmother's cabin stood. "The old-timers say the spirits of those who perished still roam the area," John said quietly. "They say their voices are carried on the wind, forever seeking justice, or perhaps just to be remembered." He looked at Emily with a concerned expression. "Some folks say it's best not to dwell on the past. Some things are best left undisturbed." He paused, then added in a lower tone, "especially when the wind starts to talk." Back at the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted. The air felt heavy, charged with a palpable tension. The whispers, which had been faint during the day, returned, with the setting sun, growing steadily louder and more insistent. They were no longer just indistinct murmurs, they were clear, chilling pronouncements. Emily heard her name repeated constantly, sometimes in a gentle whisper, other times in a harsh, accusatory tone. The whispers began to delve into her deepest fears. She heard echoes of her own insecurities. "You're alone, just like you always will be. You're a failure. You'll never amount to anything. She's gone, and it's your fault." The last one, referring to her grandmother, struck her like a physical blow. Guilt, a constant companion since her grandmother's death, resurfaced with renewed force. The paranormal activity escalated beyond the whispers. Objects in the cabin began to move on their own. A book fell from a shelf, landing open on a page detailing Arapaho burial rituals. A cold draft swept through the living room, even though all the windows were closed. The porch swing began to sway gently, as if someone were sitting on it, even though no one was there. One night, Emily awoke to find a small, intricately carved wooden flute lying on her bedside table. She had never seen it before. As she picked it up, a gust of wind rattled the windows, and she heard a chorus of whispers, louder than ever before, chanting a rhythmic melody. The melody was haunting, mournful, and deeply unsettling. Sleep became a torment. Emily had vivid nightmares, replaying the massacre she had read about in the library. But now she was an active participant, witnessing the horror firsthand. She saw the fear in the eyes of the Native Americans, heard their cries, and felt their pain. She would wake up in a cold sweat, the whispers still echoing in her ears. The isolation of the cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a prison. She felt trapped, surrounded by unseen forces, her sanity slowly unraveling. The whispers were winning. A violent storm descended upon Estes Park, mirroring the turmoil within Emily. The wind howled like a tormented beast, lashing rain against the cabin windows. The trees swayed violently, their branches scraping against the roof like skeletal fingers. The power flickered and died, plunging the cabin into darkness, illuminated only by flashes of lightning that briefly illuminated the terrified expression on Emily's face. The whispers reached a fever pitch, amplified by the howling wind. They were no longer just words. They were screams, cries, and moans, a cacophony of anguish that filled the air. Emily huddled in the corner of the living room, her hands covering her ears, but the sounds penetrated her defenses, seeping into her mind. Suddenly, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the room, and for a fleeting moment, Emily saw a vision. She was no longer in the cabin. She was on Whispering Ridge, witnessing the massacre. She saw the terrified faces of the Arapaho people, the clash of weapons, the smoke and fire. She saw a young woman clutching a child fall to the ground, an arrow protruding from her chest. The vision was visceral, horrifying, as if she were experiencing the event herself. Then, just as quickly, the vision vanished, leaving Emily trembling in the darkness. But the experience had changed her. She understood now. The whispers weren't just random voices. They were fragments of memories, echoes of the past trapped in the wind, reliving their final moments. They weren't trying to harm her, they were trying to show her, to make her understand. The storm raged on, both outside and within her, as the weight of the past settled upon her shoulders. The vision during the storm had shifted something within Emily. The fear hadn't entirely vanished, but it was now mixed with a sense of understanding, even empathy. She realized the whispers weren't malevolent. They were desperate. They were trapped, reliving their trauma, unable to find peace. A strange sense of responsibility washed over her. She felt compelled to help them, not through a direct confrontation that could escalate into something negative, but through a deeper connection with the past. As the storm subsided outside, Emily made a decision. She couldn't stay hidden in the cabin any longer. She needed to honor those spirits, acknowledge their pain in a respectful way. She remembered the book she had found about Arapaho rituals, and, with the help of some other books her grandmother owned on Native American culture, she began to better understand their customs. She learned about healing songs, prayers for peace, and the importance of nature to these people. Instead of venturing out into the storm, Emily prepared a small altar in the cabin, using some stones she found near the creek and wildflowers that had survived the rain. She created a sacred space. She lit a candle and some sage incense, seeking to purify the environment. With a book open to a page describing an ancient Arapaho song, Emily began to sing. Her voice, hesitant at first, grew stronger as she focused on the melancholic melody. The song spoke of the connection between the sky and the earth, about the cycle of life and death, about respect for the ancestors. As she sang, Emily felt a presence in the cabin, not threatening but comforting. The air seemed lighter, the tension dissipating. The whispers didn't cease completely, but they changed in tone. They were no longer cries of anguish, but soft murmurs like a distant lament. When she finished the song, Emily remained silent, her eyes closed, in deep concentration. She felt as if a gentle breeze passed through the room, carrying away the last of the negative energies. The storm completely stopped, and a weak ray of sunshine emerged from between the clouds, illuminating the small altar. Emily felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. She knew that the healing process was just beginning, but an important first step had been taken. She hadn't confronted the spirits in a risky way, but instead offered them respect and a form of connection through their traditions, seeking peace and not confrontation. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright. The air was crisp and clean, washed fresh by the rain. A sense of tranquility had settled over Estes Park, a stark contrast to the turmoil of the previous night. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was noticeably different. The heavy, oppressive feeling that had lingered for days had lifted. The air felt lighter, the silence profound. Emily woke feeling more rested than she had in weeks. The nightmares had ceased and the whispers were gone. She went to the living room, where the small altar she had created the night before still stood. The candle had burned down and the scent of sage lingered in the air. A single ray of sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the open book of Arapaho songs. She walked outside onto the porch. The forest was alive with the sounds of birdsong, and the wind, now a gentle breeze, rustled softly through the trees. It carried no whispers, only the sounds of nature. Emily took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh mountain air. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's passing. She knew the spirits hadn't vanished entirely. They were still there, a part of the land, a part of its history, but they were no longer trapped in a cycle of pain and anguish. They had been acknowledged, their story heard, their pain recognized. The ritual, the song, the simple act of remembrance had offered them a measure of peace, and in doing so had brought peace to Emily as well. The silence that now filled the cabin was not the oppressive silence of fear, but the quiet stillness of healing. The following days in Estes Park were different. The town, once shrouded in a subtle air of melancholy, now seemed vibrant and welcoming. Emily began to explore the area, hiking the trails in the nearby Rocky Mountain National Park, marveling at the stunning scenery. She visited the local shops and restaurants, striking up conversations with the friendly residents. She even returned to the library and spoke with John Miller again, this time sharing her experience with the Whispers, albeit in a more general way, focusing on the historical research she had done. John listened intently, nodding thoughtfully. He didn't dismiss her story, but instead offered a knowing smile. Emily decided to stay in Estes Park. The cabin, once a source of fear and unease, now felt like home. She began to make plans to renovate it, to bring new life to the old building, while still preserving its history. She felt a connection to the land, to the spirits that resided there, a connection born not of fear, but of respect and understanding. The wind still blew through the trees, as it always had and always would, but now it carried only the sounds of nature, the rustling leaves, the chirping birds, the distant rush of the river. The whispers were gone, replaced by a quiet stillness, a sense of peace that permeated the air. Emily knew that the past would always be a part of Estes Park, but it no longer held her captive. She had faced her fears, confronted the echoes of the past, and found a way to move forward, carrying with her a newfound sense of peace and a deeper understanding of the history that surrounded her. The whispers in the wind were silent, finally at rest.